Hi everyone, this is Tanvi from Channel Sales at Genetech. With me here we have Derek Akuri, who's a team lead with industry marketing team. We want to wait just a little bit more, let's say 5 minutes or so, to give everyone more time to come in. By then you can check your audio, if you can see, if you can hear us or not, let us know in the questions panel right next to you. Well, one of our attendees said it's loud and clear. That's great. Well, how's everyone feeling today? You can let us know. Are you feeling droopy, feeling excited? It's Friday, so I'm pretty excited for sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Derek?
Weather is it's getting a lot better these days here in Montreal. It's been, last Sunday it was snowing, so I think we've come quite a long way where now it's sunny and roughly, I'd say 70 degrees Fahrenheit, if I'm translating correctly, close to 20 degrees Celsius. So I'm excited for a long weekend. Monday is our Victoria Day holiday here in Canada, so don't expect me to be online and connected on Monday. Looking forward to relaxing. How about you?
Well, I enjoyed the weather last night because it was I think plus 17 degrees Celsius. I went for a run. Post that, I made a little bit of pork sandwiches for myself, so I'm pretty happy. Still have the leftovers. Yeah, this weekend I'm looking to just like sleep in like every other weekend, but I also have like special plans online with my family, so looking forward to that.
Nice, good. Glad you're able to connect during these challenging times, right?
Very important.
Yeah, which is a good theme of what we're going to be discussing today, right? On our presentation that we've prepared together, the current realities of not being able to physically connect, but how we could maybe make a few tweaks in our regular routine in order to connect and engage with people virtually.
Perfect. No, I agree. I want to get people prepped a little bit before we start. So throughout the presentation, everyone's going to be muted, but do not worry. On the GoToWebinar settings, you all have the option of entering questions on the questions pane, which is why in the middle of the presentation, you might see me looking towards my left because I do have a second monitor right here on which I would be monitoring your questions and answering them for you. Well, it's either that or my roommate's kind of tempting me with a cake. So that's why I would be distracted as well. But I can unmute you guys at any point in time, just in case you felt the need to elaborate a little bit on your questions, wanted to articulate it better. You can just let me know to unmute yourself and I would do that. And then you can direct it right at Derek. Sounds good? Well, so today's goal, just to give a little bit of heads up, is to make you a little more comfortable and cozy with presenting from home. Usually Channel Sales hosts techie webinars. Just yesterday we had a webinar on clearance, the day before we had it on Security Center, but this month we wanted to add a little something special. So sit back, relax, keep a bottle of water or wine handy, and we can dive right in.
Great. So is that my cue to start, Tanvi?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Derek. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do is make this session, of course, as interactive as possible, hence the theme of today's discussion. So we're going to spend a bit of time walking through how to engage your customers online and how to give a successful online presentation. A bit about me. I'm no expert in this field. In fact, this is not my focus at Genetech at all. This is just something that I thought I'd volunteer some time just because as a marketer, we spend quite a bit of time giving presentations. A lot of that time is done online. And also we've prepared a few tips and tricks for online selling. So I'd like to share a bit of wisdom, but I do remind you that I'm not a professional, so I'm just doing my best to share what I know, and I'm also going to be welcoming all of the attendees to share some of your pro tips on today's webinar later on in the presentation. So a quick introduction, Tanvi is the team lead of channel sales. You probably all interact with her on a daily or weekly basis. And my name is Derek Arcure, head of the industry marketing team here at Genetec. Throughout the presentation, I urge you to use the question dialog box located at your right-hand side of your screen in order to submit your questions. Tanvi is going to be reviewing those questions, and she'll be throwing those questions out. So feel free to send those questions. You don't have to wait till the end to send them. Feel free to do them right away based on a subject that maybe caught your interest. Note that today's video is being recorded and will be available for you and your peers and your colleagues afterwards. I also invite you to connect with us on LinkedIn. We're both very active on LinkedIn. If you have any specific questions or just want to follow what we're up to on LinkedIn, feel free to do so by searching for our names. So I'll start off by saying that our world has drastically changed overnight because of the pandemic. We've had to really adjust how we interact with one another. So you probably have felt it most, both on a professional and a personal side, where we're not able to connect face-to-face with our family and with our colleagues. And it's often making remote work a little bit more challenging. We find that we can be a little bit more productive when we're working within our own confines at home. But sometimes that can damper creativity and damper interactions with others. And so what we'd like to do is share some of our wisdom that we've acquired in the years preparing for not being able to connect face to face by giving online webinars and by interacting on online meetings. I think that if you are a remote worker, you probably have already gained a lot of that experience interacting with customers. So we'd like to make this presentation sort of like a tips and tricks on how to engage people given all the barriers that have been presented to us. Yet human engagement still continues. Despite the physical restrictions to interact with each other, there are still social engagements that are still continuing. And so since the pandemic hit, there's actually been a tremendous growth in a lot of these online applications like Google Duo, that saw a 12.4% increase, Nextdoor.com saw a 73% increase, and House Party app, which is a fun application to get in touch with people that are in your network and just randomly start video chats. So the rise of social distancing, we are seeking out new ways to interact with each other. So there's a bit of proof there that there's some interest in connecting online. Another tidbit is that recently at our ConnectDX event a few weeks ago, we've attracted over 8,000 registrants, 4,000 attendees, spent more than 10 hours consuming Genetec content and interacting with Genetec folks and our partners and interacting with each other all online. So that was quite incredible. I think that a lot of that success was due to the fact that generally people are available to consume that content online. So a bit of an opportunity here for you or partners or system integrators to start interacting with your customers online, given the restrictions that you're having to deal with. So what I'd like to cover in today's presentation is three things: how to engage your audience in a virtual meeting, so a smaller type meeting, unlike this webinar. How to engage during a webinar. So there's other tips and tricks that I have to share with you from a webinar standpoint. And then lastly, how to engage your network with social selling. So this shift in selling methodology. But first, what I'd like to do is actually bring up a poll that goes back to our engagement. So of course, we don't have the luxury of touch and feel, and we don't have complete control over what our audience is distracted with. So I'm actually going to ask Tanvi to put out a poll. Question asking currently, based off of Microsoft research, when would you expect is the first lapse of attention during an online meeting or online webinar?
Perfect. I have it up right for everyone to attend to answer.
Yeah, Tanvi, do you see the actual questions in front of you? I personally don't, so maybe you'd like to list out the options?
Of course. So the question is, when do the majority of audiences have their first lapse of attention? Within the 30 seconds, within 16 minutes, within 8 seconds, and within 4 minutes.
So feel free to respond, take a guess. There is a right answer, but
I'm still collecting the responses just now. I'll give people 15 more seconds and then we can close the poll.
okay.
And we do have a winner, actually. So, Derek, 57% said within 30 seconds.
Okay.
4% within 16 minutes. Well, I'm grateful for those of you. The 4% says within 8 seconds, and the last 32-bit said within 4 minutes.
Interesting. So I think we can go ahead and close the poll, but in reality, it's actually not many have voted for this, but it was option C. More and more, and what we're seeing is that we're seeing that lapse of attention happen a lot sooner. It's actually within 8 seconds. We start to drift off within 8 seconds of starting to listen to a presentation online. And so that's not good. There's not much separating us from a typical goldfish if we're losing attention after 8 seconds. And I really hope that you're still engaged with us now that we're a few minutes into today's webinar. But that just goes to show that we have these bigger challenges now that on one end, we're forced to interact online because it's really one of our only means. But there's, of course, more and more distractions. You have other devices that can distract you, colleagues pinging you, the competition of other content that's other webinars, potentially your competitors that are also featuring mini webinars. So we're going to address some of these challenges in today's webinar. And thanks for everyone for participating. So first I want to talk about how to give an engaging session, whether it's a demo or a webinar to either a handful of individuals or to the masses. So the first thing that I recommend is pop on the webcam and really engage by looking directly at the camera. It really helps improve that feeling of connection when you're looking directly down the barrel of the camera, even though it's challenging, like it's easier said than done. Frankly, I've struggled with it in the past, but it makes a dramatic improvement in how your audience connects with you if you're doing your best to stare down the barrel of the camera. If you're having a conversation or perhaps you're hosting a panel, often what I would recommend is while you talk, look at the camera. While you're listening, feel free to look at the video so that you could actually pick off from the cues and from the nonverbal communication that your co-host or that your panelists are exhibiting. Another recommendation is to get your audience participating slowly. So you might have noticed that we've launched a poll at the beginning of the webinar, and that was actually our strategy, is to get you to really start to slowly participate at the beginning. It's actually something that I do even in physical presentations. If I know that if I'm planning on hosting an interactive type presentation, physical presentation, and I want to start getting that interaction, what I'm going to start doing is warming up the crowd and asking them to maybe raise their hand. You know, how many of you have experienced X? And by them raising their hand, they're already starting to warm up to the idea of sharing and you know, sharing their ideas and their thoughts and polling. So you can actually take that methodology of warming up your audience and bring it into your online mediums by asking questions, getting your audience participating earlier on so that they could warm up and participate even more later on in your presentation. Another recommendation is do not fear mistakes. Tanvi, I don't know if you know, you give a lot of online presentations. Do you ever feel like, oh, I just made a mistake, man, I just want to restart? Has that ever happened to you, Tanvi?
So I joined Channel Sales about 2 years ago. So one of my first webinars that I gave out was how to make your own quotes on the Channel Partner Portal. And within the first 20 minutes, I forgot to click on Start Broadcast on GoToWebinar. So I was speaking to myself Nobody was able to hear me. Although they could see my screen, they could not hear my voice. So luckily, one of my colleagues came running to my office and let me know that we can't hear you. There's nothing going on. And I did join back. I apologized and I showed them quickly how to go about the steps again. It's a rookie mistake. The first mistakes you do always.
Well, that's an excellent example of a mistake that you do want to not keep going, right?
Absolutely.
Often you'll make a mistake where you might trip, you might forget a slide, you might forget an idea. There's no real need to announce the problem. Feel free to just keep on going because your audience likely has no idea that you've even made that mistake.
True.
And lastly, more is more. Often in a lot of webinars and like you could just feel overwhelmed with the amount of content. Given that our first lapse of attention is already now within 8 seconds, you want to focus on memorability, not on volume of content. That's something that I think we all know, but sometimes we feel pressured to, let's maybe add in more features into this presentation. Let's talk to our customer about RSA, along with drone integration, along with the electrified key integration, because all these things can be a potential point of interest, and let's prepare that into our slide deck. But the other hand of that equation is that you might be bombarding your audience, especially if there's not a structure that makes your narrative flow. So we'll be talking a little bit more about structure later on in the presentation, but I just want to keep that, I want you guys to keep that at the back of your mind. More is definitely more. Another few examples on how to engage your audience, especially in a webinar type format, is ask a colleague to be your anchor so that you avoid monologue. And that's effectively what Tanvi and I are doing. Tanvi is my anchor. She's the host of today's call. And as opposed to this being strictly a monologue where you just hear my voice for an entire hour, it's a lot more engaging to really have more of a dialogue going on. That's why Tanvi is, she's playing a vital role in terms of ensuring that this is more of a conversation than it is just someone in front of a camera speaking. One recommendation I have in terms of the length of the content is if you have an hour, really pretend that you have 30 minutes. Aim to present for half the time that you're given. It's just a rule of thumb. I mean, you could be very experienced and get your content in within 60 minutes. But again, how much attention do you think your audience will have? So a bit of this goes back to know your audience, but generally a rule of thumb and something that I've been using for many years is if you have whatever time limit you're given, aim for half. If you end early, great, everyone gets 30 minutes of their day back, and they can walk away with those key points that you nailed in, as opposed to feeling overwhelmed. The last thing that you want to do is really try to squeeze in as much content as possible within that 60-minute time slot, and then you not have enough time in order to wrap up. You miss your conclusion, you maybe miss your third point, and that could be the memorability from that side is probably not as great as if you were to just trim the content and really focus in on those key messaging points.
I agree. Keep it short and simple.
Yeah. Of course, I don't think anyone would disagree that practice makes perfect. So I really recommend practice, practice, practice. Especially if this is a new narrative for you, you really want to master, you really want to know what your next slide is so that you could build those transitions from one topic to the next. And that really helps, that engages, that practice helps you with those transitions, and those transitions help you with the overall flow of your narrative, and that could really ultimately help with your audience's engagement.
Well, Derek, did you practice for today?
Well, actually, Tanvi, both you and I did practice, right? We had a few calls going through these slides and sort of walking through how we would manage our handoffs. And so the answer is yes, Tanvi. Both you and I did for today's webinar.
I did practice with my roommates as well, Derek, by the way. I just had to bribe them a little bit.
I'm sure they didn't need a bribe, Tanvi. And lastly, I recommend creating seed questions that you feel comfortable answering. I gave a webinar Tuesday, just a few days ago, and thankfully I had 3 seed questions prepared because right away the anchor or the moderator started reading out my seed questions, which was an indication that nobody had asked any questions. And so without those seed questions, it would have probably felt like the audience was disengaged. And so those seed questions really help bridge the gap between the first initial 2 or 3 minutes of the question and answer period, and it started to spark up more questions coming in from the audience. So overall, we probably ended off with 10 questions. I had prepared 3. I think those 3 questions really helped plant some seeds and help the audience feel comfortable asking their own questions. So something that I recommend doing is just that initial bit of work that was required in order to get the momentum going from an interactive standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Some other tips that I recommend, just some, I call them pro tips, not that it makes you any more professional, but generally good ideas to have a glass of water handy, which both you'll notice Tanvi and I have available. Reason being,
help. I do have additional help.
That's good. Yeah, the last thing that you want to do is end up with a scratchy throat and you're really trying to struggle to get through your slides until you can get a glass of water. So it really helps you go in for the long run. Another recommendation is that there's no need to announce your problems. I see it quite often, especially in physical presentations as well as digital presentations, where you might announce that, oh, I see a question that's coming in. Oh, it looks like someone is not able to connect. Okay, hopefully we can get someone to fix that that issue with that connection problem. In many cases, that person that's not able to connect to the platform might be an isolated issue, and I don't think there's any need to draw attention for the entire audience to draw attention to that specific case where the connection might be choppy, they're not able to hear the audio. So I don't think it's necessary to really announce the problems. I think that that would just serve as an interruption within your narrative. I also think a big recommendation I have is to tell the audience what is expected of them. So, today's webinar, we reminded you that that you have the question and answer box to submit your questions, and that we'll have a dedicated Q&A and answer period. But we'll also have a roundtable section of today's presentation where we might also unmute you. If you have any other pro tips, we'll be asking you for some of those pro tips. So by us reminding you or us telling you that this is the expectation, that this is going to be an interactive type webinar, and that you'll be expected to unmute your mic and share some of your pro tips, well, that ultimately give you some time to start thinking of what tip you've had or you've been using that's helped you succeed in giving an online presentation. So you can start thinking about that and jotting that down, and that'll ultimately help with your the success of the overall presentation. Last thing that you want to do is just say, hey, surprise, I'm going to be asking you, or there's a quiz at the end of the presentation, and there's no sense doing a pop quiz. You really want to let people know that that quiz is coming, so that it changes their level of attention. And lastly, smile and have fun. It's the same recommendation when you're up on stage in front of hundreds of people. You really want to show that you're having fun because of that. You're sharing really your energy with the audience, and so you can still do that through digital means. So smile, show that you're having fun, and you want to show that you're happy to do this, and people will naturally connect with that. Tanvi, are you smiling right now?
A lot. I'm very happy. Yeah.
Good, and I hope you're having fun as well.
I hope you're too, Doug.
I sure am. So far we talked about some pro tips around, some tips and tricks on making your presentation somewhat more engaging. Now I want to talk about structure. So when you're receiving a message, through communication, you're really using both sides of your brain. There's the emotional side that really helps you understand tone and intonation and really reads emotion. And then there's the actual structure, right? Am I just saying a bunch of words without any stop and it just continues, or is it structured and like does it fit together? And so my recommendation is to really give some attention before your presentation, give some attention to really structure your narrative. Now, not to say that your presentation might need structure. This is also a tip to consider when you're just having a conversation, or you're maybe pitching a security center to a customer and you want to focus in on 3 themes. Like, for example, you're pitching, there's an access control opportunity and you want to walk away, or you want to really drill in 3 key points to your customer on why Synergis is better than any other access control platform. One key theme might be around open architecture. Your current customer is on a proprietary system. They feel trapped, they feel locked in. You can assure them that with Synergis, they could take advantage of a wide array of open source and from the ecosystem of devices, from Mercury panels to HID, and you can have a little bit of a nugget, a conversation to talk about open architecture versus proprietary. What are the pros and cons of both sides of the coin? And perhaps why open architecture is right for that customer that's spent 20 years on their legacy proprietary access control system. And your second theme might be around unification. Talk about the advantages of having access control, video, intrusion, ALPR, all on one platform for the operator that has to deal, or that just has one pane of glass, but also for the IT staff that doesn't have to maintain a multitude of systems that were never designed to work together. And they could just focus in on one system to manage upgrades and to maintain. And as a result, there's a total cost of ownership reduction, infrastructure maintenance, and so on. And so that would be your second theme. And perhaps your third theme would be around the importance of cybersecurity and how emerging or threats are changing, and how cybersecurity is more important now than ever, and that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So in their existing proprietary access control architecture, you couldn't help but notice that they have a strong CIOS credential, but they have a vulnerability from the reader to the controller. And so all you're doing is you're grouping up these topics into key 3 narratives, so that your audience can walk away with these 3 things that they remember, as opposed to sort of feeling bombarded. Like, you can take a lot of content, and through organization, you can make it a lot more memorable than if it was just randomly sorted. That's my point that I'm trying to make. So try to think of, what are my key themes that I want my audience to walk away with, because your goal is memorability, not volume of content. And then set the tone, create your introduction, create your summary, and that's where you get that sandwich. And then bring that all together. What's your overarching narrative? What's your call to action? So maybe your overarching narrative for, if you're visiting a superintendent at a K-12 school, your overarching narrative might be how you want to help students improve their grades, focus on their studies, as opposed to being distracted by the bully, distracted by potential security incidents. You want to equip the security team to foster this environment of safety, as opposed to potential environment of insecurity. And so that might be your overarching narrative that bleeds into your key themes. And your key themes might be, moving from reactive to proactive, catching the bad guys, and then a forensic investigation, speeding up your forensic investigation, and things like that. So ultimately, what I'd urge you to do is take your existing pitch today, and instead of presenting the product and presenting a series of features, try to organize them into thematics, build that overarching narrative. Maybe that narrative is around how security can play a broader role in other departments. From a healthcare standpoint, security you should build your vision around not just reacting to threats, but improving safety, also improving operational information, guiding construction and engineering teams to build a hospital of the future, and then you tie that back into your key themes of the presentation. Another recommendation is always add a call to action. What's your big call to action after the presentation? What type of change of behavior you're trying to drive? You'll notice in strong presentations, they conclude and they ask you to do one thing that I want you to start thinking differently about, one thing that I want you to do differently tomorrow when you go to work. Tanvi, what are your thoughts on this presentation structure? Is this something that you use in your presentations?
So I definitely use most of it. There's one thing that sometimes I fail to do, and I apologize to my team as well. Sometimes I forget to conclude my presentation or summarize the presentation because more often I'm running out of time. Like you said in the beginning, it's great to cut your presentation short by half. If you aiming for 60 minutes, maybe try and wrap it up in 40 minutes. But usually people can tend to go overboard because they want to give as much information as possible. So I am guilty of that sometimes, and that's why I fail to summarize. But I don't want to get too technical, but I do give presentations on Stratocast once in a while. And when I do that, I always make sure there's a call to action in the end, and that's giving all my participants or attendees a registration form for them to fill and sign up for Stratocast trial account. So one thing good, one thing I'm yet to learn.
Yeah, that's an excellent call to action. And you're right, the conclusion is not something that you'd often think about, right? Especially on a short panel or a short dialogue that you're publishing online. Just had the conversation, you're probably wondering, well, why summarize? But that summary is key, especially because it's the last few seconds of your video, and it's likely what your audience will retain.
Exactly. Especially if it's a long presentation, they won't remember what was the second or third slide anyway.
You got it. All right. Other tips and tricks for an effective presentation deck. So one recommendation that I have is to improve interaction within your slides is to use GIFs in your presentations, and emails might be something that can improve. So I'll actually show you an example after this slide as a GIF that I've used in a previous presentation. And there's ways to actually download GIFs. If you search anything on Google, if you click on images under tools or settings, you could select I only want GIFs, and you'll get millions and millions of GIFs that you can incorporate into your presentation. And your PowerPoint presentation will support them by default. I also suggest limiting wording and maximize imagery. Images are super important. There's so much more, you can communicate so much more with images than with, a bullet point list of things that you've put together. So keep that in mind. I know that it's simple to just sort of write down some points, and as I build out decks, I typically start by just putting down points on a slide deck, and then I'll start working on adding a bit more imagery and then limiting and trimming as much text as possible. Especially in a larger webinar or in a larger presentation, you think of the text on the slides should really only be your cue to talk about a specific subject. If you could read it, then there's really demotes the reason to have a presenter online. I also suggest keeping font colors consistent, so using a consistent color palette, just to not confuse or overwhelm your audience with the yellow, brown, and all kinds of different colors like pink. So something to keep in mind. And slides are not mandatory. In fact, personally, I use slides really as a presentation aid, but I'd love to not use slides. I don't think I'd be able to remember all of this without slide decks. So use it to help you, but don't feel like it's mandatory. Don't feel like decks are always mandatory. Now, I'm in marketing, and so the reason why we use slides so often is because a big part of our job is to equip the sales team with narratives.
Yeah.
So we're obviously, decks are our output. We produce decks and we produce documents that accompany those presentation decks. And so we probably use it way more than we really should. So I'm guilty of that. I probably use slides more than I really should. But my excuse is that we're constantly pumping out decks as a marketing team.
The sales teams needs you.
I'm glad that I'm getting that validation, Tanvi. I was getting concerned. So here's an example of a GIF used in a presentation that I gave earlier this week. So all I'm explaining here is our basic event to action mechanism in Security Center. So when the video analytic detects that there's an intruder in that field of view, you can configure an event to action, where once that happens, then the loud horn speaker is activated and the strobe lights are activated automatically. No need to manually respond to that event and then trigger strobe lights. So that was the point that I was trying to articulate. Originally, I thought, let me grab a maybe 5-second video clip that shows the intrusion alarm and then just shows it from Security Center perspective. But then I thought, let me build out more dramatic imagery and show this event causes this action. Another thing that comes down to presentation structure is that I kept a legend at the bottom of the presentation. I informed everyone that I was going to go through a defense in-depth methodology that consists of detect your intruder, deter, delay, assess, communicate, and respond. And every time I was ready to move on to the next phase, we'd see this shift in color from deter to delay. So at any point in time, your audience knows where exactly you are in your presentation. And lastly, I suggest dressing for success on camera. It's not the end of the world if you're wearing a flowery shirt, but my recommendation is to wear a darker, cooler tone. And I made sure that I was wearing something dark for today's presentation. If you have long hair, we recommend tying your hair back. We suggest contact lenses because it can get a bit distracting if you're wearing glasses and you have a light in front of you that is glaring and you sort of see the camera within the lenses. And it just takes away from being able to really track the eye contact. I suggest choosing a quiet location with a solid background, something that's well lit. Reason I suggest that is just to avoid the distractions in the background. If you have someone walking, that could be a bit distracting. And avoid swivel chairs, because it can be a habit when you're sitting on a swivel chair and you're sort of going in presentation performance mode and you don't realize, but you're actually swiveling and distracting the heck out of your audience. I also recommend limit interruptions. There's only so much that you can control, right? You might have someone that's banging outside your apartment door. There's really no control there other than maybe posting a sign that says, I'm on a webinar, please keep quiet. But some of the go-to recommendations is to use a hardwired internet connection, invest in integrated audio and mic device. Often computers every computer is different, but sometimes the output of the speaker makes it into the mic and you get this constant echo. A quick fix for that is a device like this. This is my Jabra. It's automatically, it's been designed and it has a reputation that the speaker that I get when Tanvi is speaking doesn't actually get incorporated into the microphone as well, limiting that echo. Okay, so that wraps up our first 2 phases of today's presentation. The last topic that I want to talk about is how to engage with your network. So this is about really landing the meeting and trying to engage with customers that are maybe within your network and trying to grow your network. And this is also a quick guide towards social selling. So at first, I did very surface level research here, but there is evidence, and the evidence is quite glaring, that there's this need for social selling. CEB, which is a partner that we use for our research, according to a lot of their research that they've been doing, most customers will reach out to a sales rep 57% of the way through their purchase journey. That means that they're doing all of their learning online. And so we have to shift mindset from expecting customers to learn only from us to now expecting customers to learn from a variety of different vehicles online. 54% of people are now involved in the average B2B buying decision. 75% of B2B buyers are now using social media to research vendors. So that just indicates that it's important to get a social media presence. Otherwise, you're not going to be part of that initial learning vehicle. 90% of decision makers say they never respond to cold outreaches. So if you're still reaching out cold, there's some ways to sort of make that a little bit warmer by using social networks and by leveraging any potential joint contacts and asking second degree connections to maybe introduce you as a warm outreach. And lastly, 74% of buyers choose the sales rep that was first to add the value and insight. So it's sort of shifting the way that we sell, Tanvi. So there's this new sales model that's emerging. The old one consisted of cold calling, demo, sales demonstration, and then getting qualified leads and sort of building out the funnel that way. That's what the industry calls sales 1.0. And now there's this new social selling model that consists of social networks, engagement, and education. And so to concretely put that together, I want you to think about the last time that you bought a car. If it was recent, you probably bought a car completely different in the way that we used to do it maybe 10 years ago. So a decade ago, purchasing a car probably started at the car car dealership, right? You walk in, you ask, hey, I'm just having a browse, looking for a car that meets my need. I don't need anything fast. I just need to get from point A to point B. What do you got? And the sales rep would take control of the conversation and really educate you. It was a one-to-one type interaction. Today, you buy a car and you're smarter than the actual car salesperson, right? You're walking in saying, hi, I already did my research. I want this specific car and make and model because I've already compared it with 5 other vehicles in its class, and I found that this is probably the best for me. But I'm really happy to go with any other vehicle. I just want you to tell me what's the best price that you can give me. And all of a sudden, as a sales rep, you're now forced into this commodity type deal where you're reduced to pretty much a quote, what's the best price you can give me? And if you don't give me the best price, then I'm walking off. And so that happened because this connected customer is reaching out to social networks and reviewing blogs and doing all the research beforehand. They're getting themselves educated and they're engaging with a multitude of vendors before they even reach out to the sales rep. And so we need to adapt as social sellers to start educating our social networks and engaging with them online. And so I prepared a few tips and tricks on engaging with your community. Ready to go, Tanvi?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the first one is quite basic. I recommend build out your profile, make it pretty, add your picture, keep the information relevant and up to date, but also don't overdo it with your bio. I don't think people really want to see a 4 to 5 paragraph introduction. I think keeping it simple, crisp, and clean, having an up-to-date picture. I'll leave that up to you if you want an up-to-date picture. Some people feel like because they've been losing hair, they don't want to update their new picture. They want to stick back, 10, 15 years.
Maybe they're getting wrinkly now, they're aging.
That's it. Yeah. So I'll let you guys decide what's best for you. I think it's important to know your audience and at least carve out your audience in order to build out your goal. So for my social selling, my audience is frankly people on this call. It's system integrators within the security community. It's end users in security and operations. It's consultants within physical security. It's ultimately where Genetec plays. That's my audience. And I have a feeling for what sort of content that they're looking for. And so I'm not gonna, do a bunch of posts and try to educate on security, but then start commenting on, my favorite cats. Because that's all of a sudden might turn people off, and that audience that was sort of had this unspoken expectation might get turned off with something that was radically different. So consistency is key. I think you should build a goal and stick to it. If you want to be, the person that talks about cameras or the person that educates people on access control, build out that goal. You recognize that there's a need to ultimately educate, that it's tough finding information, so you want to really add value, and you're going to focus on a specific subject and really stick to that. And that's okay if you change your jobs and you shift focus. You might have recognized that I've been super access control and identity access management oriented in the past. I've now shifted in this new role that's more industry marketing oriented, and you probably see a lot more energy and utility or healthcare or regulated market type content. I think those shifts are okay, but not too frequently. You want to really stick consistent as best as possible and ultimately be useful, right? Be useful with the times based on what are some relevant subjects, so that people are finding that they're getting value from subscribing to you, as opposed to maybe getting annoyed. And that's a difference. If you're posting 12 to 15 times a day, you could probably be very annoying, but if those 12 to 15 posts are value add for your subscribers or your community, then why would anyone want to unsubscribe, right?
Yeah, and also one more thing, that like over the years, I've learned to keep the professional profile separate from the personal profile. So many of us, we have alternate lives, we have Facebook or Instagram or even Gmails, right? So the kind of content you would share on your personal profile should be different than what you share on your professional profile. You can't keep on blasting people the way you do on a personal profile as in the private chats. So that's a key learning that I've learned in the last 5 years, especially after moving to Canada as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You could I think of partitions in Security Center, right? You make a model like this partition is for this audience and this partition is for that audience. I use my Facebook account for personal reasons, my Instagram account for personal reasons, but LinkedIn is reserved for social selling, Genetech content.
Exactly.
Yeah. Some other tips, and a lot of this comes with bandwidth. You're going to need the time to really invest in social selling, but some tips that I have is to take the time to film these short little clips of monologues or even conversations. You could use your built-in camera in your computer to film a quick conversation and talk about a particular subject, and then post it online. That might be a way to sort of get your narrative out there. And we're actually going to be featuring a special guest that's going to be joining us very, very soon. And he's going to walk us through how he's started to do that, how he's been getting a big following online. I also recommend writing a series of LinkedIn articles, sort of similar to the video concept. You can also embed videos in your LinkedIn articles. When you write on LinkedIn, that helps improve your overall SEO. These are links that are, if people are searching, how do I secure my solar panels? How do I strengthen my perimeter defense? How to insert your narrative or your guidance and your advice, put that into a LinkedIn article, and you'll start to see people naturally start reaching out. And don't expect maybe too much attention right away as soon as you publish it, but over the months and years, you'll start to see that there's a following, that people are actually starting to use that content. One of my favorite LinkedIn articles that I've written in the past was 3 myths around your access control security. It's just something that I've learned from customers, visiting customer sites. I recall that there were some customers concerned around electronic locks and how secure is that? What if someone was able to, I don't put electronic locks on my perimeter because I'm not sure someone can hack the airwaves and access, unlock the door. And while that's a valid concern, in reality, there's more encryption on those encrypted airwaves than there is on your typical Wiegand reader, right? That's not encrypted. So we put so much emphasis or so much false safety into an online wired reader that's unencrypted, but we then fail to consider this new generation of electronic locks that, sure, while they're wireless, they also are encrypted in many cases, using a pretty strong encryption methodology. So that was one of the articles that I think got a lot of attention, and I even pitched that story to an online magazine, and it got some additional pickups. So the more content you write, the more visibility that you'll get. I also urge you to reach out to your vendors, reach out to some of your partners, and join up. Reach out to your tech partners and join up and do a webinar together. Ultimately, your partners might already have the tools that they need to actually get that content out there. And the more visibility that you'll get, the more of this social selling, you'll get closer and closer to social selling and building up that visibility. You could also reach out if you're an avid reader of different online magazines. Reach out to the editor or to the journalist and try to pitch a story. They often want to hear what you have to say. And here's an example of my colleague Jermaine, who posted a quick 53-second video trying to promote people to attend Genetec Connect DX a few weeks ago. So one thing that I really hope that you take away from today's presentation is that visibility ultimately leads to memorability, right? The more visible you are online, the more memorable you start to become. The first time you might see someone deliver some insightful information, you might not remember their name, but if you see them maybe 3 or 4 times throughout that month, they start to become more memorable and you start to actually remember their name, and it would be easier for them to look you up. And the more memorable you become, the more credible ultimately you become. And credibility is key in social selling, right? Yeah. Remember that statistic that the majority of individuals feel like they're gonna spend with their first rep that was able to offer them credible information. Well, I think that this is your flow to build up that credibility. So what I'd like to do is take the next 10 or so minutes to really invite others to share their pro tips. So Tanvi, I believe that you'll be reaching out to the audience, all of our attendees today. Feel free to take over and walk them through that. I know that we have one special guest that's waiting online. Maybe we could introduce him once we've upgraded his access to GoToWebinar.
Perfect. So let's do that.
Were you able to find him? Do you want me to maybe introduce him as you're selecting him out of the staff menu? Oh, he's actually already a staff member.
He's already been added.
He's already been added. Okay, so I want to introduce everyone to Phil Coppola. He is the New Jersey RSM at Genetec, and if you're lucky, you might have already seen a lot of his content that he's been producing online. I tremendously respect Phil because during this pandemic, he's done a lot of transformation where he's been putting out a lot of great educational content online, and he's been building up a big following. So Phil, with that, I'd like for you to pass the floor over to you to maybe share some of your pro tips for our audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Tanvi and Derek. I'd like to think that I've been doing a halfway decent job of getting out there on social media and in doing some really good, effective webinars. But boy, oh boy, did I get a lot of good content. Like that one thing that you mentioned about having seed questions. Nothing's worse than getting to the end of a webinar and saying, all right, any questions? And then there's no questions. And it clams everybody up, everybody shuts down, and then webinar over. But if you have a couple of those in the queue, it might get some people to open up a little bit more. So I think that's fantastic. This was actually a great idea. So as you guys mentioned, I have a couple of tips. Again, really sort of geared towards LinkedIn. I think that there's probably some value in some of the other platforms like Facebook for groups and maybe Instagram to some degree. I've experimented with both of those, but I'm seeing a lot of the traction primarily on LinkedIn because I think everybody just knows that if you're doing business, LinkedIn is the social media platform for business. So I've compiled just a handful of tips here, just a few minutes, and then I'll turn it back over to you guys and make myself available for any questions as well. So the first thing, and this is probably the most important, do not hawk products, right? So people are coming to these platforms looking for insightful information. They want to see solutions. The first thing that you're going to glaze over as you're going through your feed is just another advertisement. If your posts look like an advertisement, it's going to get glazed over and it's just going to get lost. Versus having a point of view, sharing a bit of advice, having an anecdote, and if you can make those pithy, funny, different, unique. So I've actually taken to the memes. So if you go to my LinkedIn profile and you just do a quick search for Phil Coppola, I'll come up. Connect with me, please. I've got about 3,100 LinkedIn followers right now. And a lot of those came in the last few weeks as we've been stuck here in quarantine and we've been going about this. But you'll see a lot of it is just like, it's from a specific point of view. It has a clear narrative, but it's funny, it's different. They kind of stand out from the crowd. And what I'm really most proud of is a lot of these posts are getting a lot of traction just in terms of views. So when you post something to LinkedIn, LinkedIn will show you how many people have actually viewed that specific thing. So these memes, whether they're about fever detection or something else that, you know, I feel passionately about, they're getting 3,000 views, 4,000 views versus, and I actually did this as an experiment, I took a piece of general marketing material that Genetec put out. I shared it, I put my own little take on it, and right now it's sitting at about 300 views, posted at the same exact time, right? But one is very clearly a piece of marketing material that's meant to promote a product, and one is coming from a very specific narrative viewpoint. And one of them is doing 100% better than the other, right? So don't offer products, offer solutions, offer point of view. Have a clear narrative, and I think you guys have done a fantastic job of hammering that point home. But as an aside to that, have a clear call to action. I noticed that the majority of my posts that get more comments and get more likes have a very specific call to action somewhere in the text. So we'll put up a picture. LinkedIn gives you something like 1,900 characters. So you write a description talking about that picture. It's almost like a mini article. And then at the end, hey, what do you think? Leave a comment here, leave an emoji, give me a thumbs up. What that will do is it games the LinkedIn algorithm. And the more views that post gets, the longer the description, and the more people that you have commenting, it bumps that post up. So now even more people view it. So it has like this sort of snowball type of effect. Also, hashtags. Hashtags are key. They're the way that the majority of the social media platforms work, especially like Twitter, Instagram, and of course, LinkedIn. If you're using LinkedIn, you've got certain hashtags that you follow. So if you're in this business, you're probably following hashtag security, hashtag surveillance, hashtag video surveillance, hashtag VMS, hashtag CCTV. And what that does is the algorithm goes out and finds posts that are popular in those hashtags, and it brings them into your newsfeed. And then, of course, you can sift based on that, and you could just scroll a specific hashtag. If you look at, I think it's hashtag surveillance right now, the top 7 posts are all from me. Now, some of them are from me, some of them are from people that shared it, some of them are from, just like people tagging comments from other posts. So the hashtagging is key because it's going to get your post to come up in a bunch of different places at the same time, and then that's going to get amalgamated into somebody's news feed, and that's how they're going to find you. Don't do a billion hashtags, right? That's sort of bad practice. But if you pick the right hashtags, I'm always in security, surveillance, video surveillance, VMS, access control if it's an access control related thing. And then maybe even if you're really going to take this seriously, create your own hashtag. So I'm doing hashtag Phil Coppola. That way, if somebody does a search for me, they'll see all my posts in one convenient location. Be consistent. And what I mean by that is be consistent in your attitude. If you're funny or if you've got a good outgoing personality, make sure that comes through and be consistent that way, because people will come to Derek, sort of like what you were saying earlier. You're going to get more memorable, and people are going to come to expect certain things from you. So make sure that messaging is always consistent. That way, when you turn it around, if you get serious, people are going to say, wow, he's usually pretty funny, and now he's coming across differently. Maybe this is something that I should pay more attention to, or something like that. So just be consistent in your attitude as much as possible, and be consistent in your posting schedule. Don't be one of these people that posts once a week, once a month, once a year. I think I read a statistic, something to the effect of 90% of the people on LinkedIn never post, right? You're just there to read. if you're going to use this platform as a way to increase business, increase the lead generation and things of that nature, in order to gain that visibility and gain that credibility, as Derek was talking about earlier, you gotta be on there. So my posting schedule is once a day at least. And I try to do like 1 to 2 long form videos per week that I'm posting to my YouTube channel. Then I'm linking those videos to a link in LinkedIn to kind of cross-pollinate both platforms, right? So I post to YouTube, I make a post about it on LinkedIn, that sends traffic to YouTube, which sends traffic back to LinkedIn. So it's like the symbiotic thing. And I'm also emailing. Don't forget about email. Email, yeah, you know, it's sort of the older school thing. But if you've got something really relevant to say, or if you're posting a video on YouTube, email it to your customers and post it to LinkedIn, or tell people in the email to check out your profile on LinkedIn, or tell them to check out your channel on YouTube. Don't feel like these platforms have to be separate. Join them all together. That's the fastest way to get to a lot of followers. You know, I am not ashamed to say it. I did call my mother and tell her to subscribe to my YouTube channel because I needed more subscribers. And I'm not afraid to ask you either. Please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe and watch the videos. There's a lot of really good content there. Just do a search for Phil Coppola on YouTube. Last thing, I'm sorry, Tanvi, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you can post one of your posts, Jeff, on LinkedIn here on the chat for people to see why it gained a lot more views. Maybe it was a certain kind of hashtag, maybe your wording was of some kind. It'll be a great example, you know, for us to click on and read that article as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put a couple in there to give you a few different examples. Last thing, just a couple of recommendations. So when you leave this webinar today and you're full of energy and you want to go out there and really kind of do this thing, obviously the advice that you've gotten here thus far has been fantastic from Derek and from Tanvi. I'd also recommend that you follow Gary Vaynerchuk on as many different platforms as you can. He's really active on LinkedIn. He has this concept called the $1.98 strategy, which I really like. It's basically leaving your 2 cents 99 times a day to get to $1.98. This is a great way to grow your following, and that's sort of what I started to do in the beginning. You follow hashtags, you see people making posts, you comment on those posts. They will comment back. They'll follow you, you'll follow them. And before you know it, you're increasing your follower base by 100, 200, 300 people. And again, this is all logarithmic, right? So as you get 100 followers, those 100 followers become 1,000 followers pretty quick. And the last one I would recommend is somebody by the name of Kylie Francis, Kylie. She's newer to the space, but she's got some great tips about how to get your posts to go viral and how to use hashtags to their fullest potential. I've taken a number of her recommendations and I've seen exponential growth on a lot of my different posts. So that's it. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you know, Phil Coppola at pcoppola@genetec.com. Follow me on YouTube. Phil Coppola is the channel, and then obviously do a search for Phil Coppola on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, Phil, you know, I truly believe that visibility breeds visibility because, you know, if you weren't super visible during the pandemic, I don't think we would have thought of you. So here you are getting more visibility because you're sharing your 2 cents and getting out there. So we really appreciate what you're doing for Genetec. And thanks for sharing your opinion. I've personally laughed at a lot of your memes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Now, Tanvi, it looks like we have gone over time, so we do want to be respectful of everyone that has a hard stop at the hour. It looks like we're about 5 minutes over. Doesn't look like we do have time for questions. What I'd suggest doing is that maybe we respond to some of these questions one-off. We potentially conclude today's webinar. And I know that some are really coming in right now, so I'd hate to do that, but all to say is that if people have a hard stop and want to take off, feel free to do so. I know that I have a meeting, and but I've noticed that the person I have the meeting with is also on this webinar, so I'm not too concerned.
I just have a quick last poll for everyone. But before I do that, if Phil can just post the names, the full names of Gary and Kyle, so that people can search them later and get content, it would be great, Phil. You have the option of putting it in the chat option. Just launching a quick poll for everyone. For all of you who want to see some similar content in the near future, please feel free to answer that poll for us. For everyone else, I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. If you have any other feedback or criticism for us, please feel free to email us at channelssales@genetec.com. I'm looking forward to connect with some of you in the near future quite soon.
Great. Thanks so much for everyone's time today.
Right. Thank you so much, Derek.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you online.
Bye.